So President Trump's one big beautiful bill has just passed, meaning there are millions and millions of dollars in benefits coming to the American people. There's also some big changes though, and today I want to break down what is in the Senate's version of this bill. So today, Republicans say that this is a major win. That's good news, but again, keep in mind, the House of Representatives still has to pass this exact same bill. According to reports, the vote on this bill will be this week in the House. But the big question, what does the Senate Republican tax and spending bill mean for your money? That was one of the questions I received over the past 24 hours. Everybody is wanting to know. Okay, great. So we're going to receive about $10,000 per household, but how does this break down? Well, that's what we're going to discuss in today's video. So, if you want to know all the updates, stick around and I'll keep you updated on what is in this bill. But let's start from the beginning. So look at this. Here is the breakdown. First, the state and local tax deduction. That's the first one that we're going to hit on. Now, there's many different things. There's things for businesses. There's things for the rich. There's some stuff for the lower income households. There's things for families with children, people that are looking to buy a car, people that work and receive tips and overtime. And well, we're going to get to all that in just a moment. But the reason why I'm showing you this, because I know a lot of people are wondering, is this going to go through? The answer as of right now is most likely yes. Okay, so I'm going to break this down. I'm just going to read everything that's in it as of right now, but keep in mind, these things could change. So the first one, state and local tax deduction. It says the Senate legislation incorporates a deal to raise the limit on the state and local tax deduction to $40,000 annually for a 5-year period. The write-off would phase out for taxpayers who make more than $500,000 per year. After the 5-year period, the limit would snap back to the current $10,000 limit imposed in the 2017 tax law. Now, I know a lot of people ask this, why would they increase the limit and then in 2029 it would just go right back? Well, or 2030, whenever it is. The reason they do that is to sample and to test to see if it works. And again, keep in mind, this is a Trump policy. This is what President Trump wants to do. And again, the reason I bring it to your attention is because if Republicans don't win re-election in the next presidential election, then again, Democrats could completely change this. So we'll see what happens there. But again, it will snap back to the 2017 tax law at $10,000 in 5 years. So keep that in mind. The next one, no tax on tips. Says workers would be exempt from taxes on tip income up to $25,000 per individual, as well as overtime up to $12,500 per individual and $25,000 per couple. The tax breaks run through 2028. Those deductions start to phase out at $150,000 in income per person. Now, we'll address the phase outs, because what if you make $165,000? How much would you be able to claim? Well, we'll address that in a future video. Today, just want to explain what is currently being discussed, all right? Keep in mind, this hasn't passed the House yet. This version has only passed the Senate. The House version passed a month ago, but that version was changed by the Senate, which means the Senate's version goes back to the House. The House has to pass that exact bill, and then it gets sent to President Trump. The next thing in the bill is Medicaid. It says spending on Medicaid health insurance would be cut by nearly $1 trillion over the 10 years, and 11.8 million Americans would lose health insurance. It says the measure would put a new limit on the mechanism nearly all states use to increase federal Medicaid funding. The legislation would cap so-called provider taxes that states use toward defraying their Medicaid matching fund requirements. It says the cap would be phased in beginning in 2028 for states that expanded Medicaid coverage for low-income people under the Affordable Care Act. It says the measure would create a new work requirement for Medicaid recipients unless they are elderly, disabled, or have children under 14 years old. Medicaid beneficiaries who gain eligibility through the Affordable Care Act would have to pay a share of costs through charges like copays. This is where some are saying and arguing that this is only increasing the cost for the American people. It is. Okay, this is not an increase. This is a decrease. There's cuts coming, but some say we have to do this in order to ensure that Medicaid can continue. So again, there's some wins, there's some losses. Here's the next one. It kind of ties into Medicaid as well. Rural Hospital Fund. It says the Senate added a $50 billion rural hospital fund, an effort to mitigate the impact of Medicaid cuts on those institutions. Rural lawmakers raised concerns that Medicaid cuts would force local hospitals to close. That is one of the concerns, that these cuts to Medicaid, it's going to cause less people to go into some of these hospitals and clinics. As a result, they could actually make less money. If they are not profitable, they could eventually close. So yes, that is one of the reasons why putting $50 billion into this rural hospital fund was seen as necessary. Here's the next one. This is a big one. Clean energy. It says GOP senators fast-tracked a phase-out of green energy tax credits, including wind and solar power. The revised bill will require wind and solar projects to be in service by the end of 2027 to receive the tax break. So again, this isn't just an open-ended thing. They're saying, you want to provide this break? Okay, fine, but you have until this date. That's what you have. Here's another one, and this was a big one. Electric vehicles. Says a popular $7,500 tax credit for consumer purchases of new and used electric vehicles would end on September 30th, 2025, earlier than the previous version of the bill that would have eliminated the credit at the end of the year. Again, so this is the September 30th, okay, 2025. This is the end of the fiscal year. In the United States, our fiscal year goes from October 1st to September 30th. So that's when they're going to end it. Here's another one that President Trump was adamant about, the auto loan tax deduction, trying to improve purchases here in the United States. It says a deduction up to $10,000 would be established for interest payments on auto loans from 2025 through 2028. The tax break is only eligible for new vehicles whose final assembly is in the United States. First off, $10,000 in interest is a horrible loan. Okay, for example, the amount of money you would have to pay to get interest up to $10,000, okay, in a year, it's insane. Okay, I'm not even going to go over the numbers there, but that's insane, and it only applies through loans from 2025 through 2028. Here's another big one. This one's for businesses, but they say this is going to trickle down to the American people. For workers, permanent business tax breaks. It says 3 business tax deductions would be made permanent. That includes the ability to use depreciation and amortization as the basis for interest expensing, the research and development write-off, and 100% bonus depreciation for certain property. That includes machinery and factories. They say it's a win for banks who could see a surge in lending as companies have more cash freed up to invest in projects. Not only that, if they can kind of get more tax breaks, that means they could use some of that money to invest into the people. That's another big one, okay? That means more people could have jobs. Here's another one, semiconductors. Look at this. It says an investment credit for semiconductor manufacturers would be increased to 35% from 25%, giving chip makers more incentive to break ground on new facilities by an existing 2026 deadline. Now, do I think we see a lot of semiconductor manufacturers coming into the United States? I don't know if they do. They probably have plans and they say they will, but once President Trump is out of office, I don't know if this actually goes through. Okay, so is this big? This looks like it could be big, but it depends on what semiconductor manufacturers decide to come into the United States. So we'll see what happens there. Here's a big one. because this was going to be a massive hit to millions of people. The child tax credit says the maximum child tax credit would rise to $2,200 from $2,000 per child. It also would be made permanent and adjusted for inflation. Now you're probably thinking, that's only a $200 increase. That's nothing. Keep in mind that if the child tax credit extension didn't go through, which again, it's only passed the Senate, but if this didn't pass by January 1st, the child tax credit for 2026 would only be $1,000. So yes, it's massive. It's over 100%. It's a 120% increase. Okay? That's a huge increase. Again, 46 million people, they file taxes and claim the child tax credit. So 46 million people just saw a huge boost, double the tax credit right there. Now, others are going to ask, well, I thought it was $2,500. It was in the House. The Senate decided, nope, $2,500. We're not going to make that a $2,500 child tax credit for the next 4 years and then go right back to $2,000. We're not going to do that. We're just going to make it $2,200 permanent. Okay, so we don't have to renegotiate, and it's going to be adjusted for inflation. So we'll see how it's adjusted, though. That's the big question. Here's another one. Talked about this one before. The Trump child accounts says parents, relatives, and others would be able to contribute up to $5,000 in total annually to tax-deferred Trump investment accounts for children until they turn 18. Says, though, children who are U.S. citizens born from 2025 through 2028, essentially during Trump's current term, would get a $1,000 contribution to their accounts from the federal government. I've talked about that one before. There's an endowment tax, the current 1.4% tax on net investment income or private college and university endowments would go up for better funded institutions. The new tiered tax rate structure would climb as high as 8% for colleges with the most endowment income per student. There's also consumer protection. The funding cap for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB, would be cut almost in half to 6.5% in total operating expenses of the Federal Reserve System. I know a lot of people are wondering, what does this mean for us? Well, we'll address that in a future video. Here's another one, and this is a big hit to some, but again, some say it's necessary, is food aid. Well, how is this going to change? It says food assistance for low-income Americans would be cut by expanding existing work requirements for federal food stamps to cover beneficiaries up to 65 years old. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, currently only requires work documentation for recipients up to 60 years old. So again, they're increasing it by 5 years. Again, some say this is a massive cut. It's going to hurt millions of people. But again, we're going to see what happens there. It does say there's a new cost sharing requirement. Also would require states to cover a portion of food stamp benefits received by their residents. It's going to be interesting to see what states, what their benefits package looks like when it gets pushed over to the states. Because again, this has been federally funded and it's been run by the federal government. So we'll see what happens when specific states get their hands on it and what they decide to do to it. Now let's talk about border security. It says border wall and detention centers. The president's crackdown on undocumented migrants would get $45 billion for detention centers and nearly $47 billion for infrastructure at the southern border, which includes the border wall constructions. So that's something that President Trump has been adamant about as well, to ensure that there is money to finish off the border wall, to ensure that illegal immigrants are not getting into the United States, and that if they do, we catch them and we put them in detention centers before we deport them back to their home countries. And then the last one, remittances. It says migrants and others who send money abroad would be taxed at 1% of the amount of the transfer. That's a decrease from a 3.5% levy in the House version of the bill. So again, the House's version was a little more strict, didn't want people sending money abroad. The Senate's version says, yep, you can still send money, but at a 1% fee. So that's what's in the bill. Again, as soon as we get information from the House and what their side is, I promise I'll bring you all the latest news and updates. But as of today, that's what we know. Millions of Americans are about to receive a huge increase, but at the same time, we are still seeing some reductions and cuts elsewhere. So we'll see how this plays out, but according to multiple experts, this is actually a positive. This is a good thing. And so again, I understand if you are receiving SNAP benefits or you're receiving Medicaid and now you are potentially cut off or you have to pay, you're probably thinking, well, this hurts. But at the same time, according to experts, this right here is better than if we did nothing at all and millions of Americans saw an increase to their tax rate. So we'll see what happens. But again, thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the next one.